By 1960, every Fortune 500 company in America had a corporate planning function. Long-range planning had become the defining discipline of the modern business executive. Companies were investing millions of dollars in planning processes designed to map out their future with precision. And almost none of it was working. The plans were being built. They were being presented in elaborate documents. They were being filed in boardrooms. And then they were being ignored. The Fortune 500 companies that were funding research at Stanford's Research Institute had a simple question: why is corporate planning failing? And what would replace it? A management consultant named Albert Humphrey led the research team that would spend the next decade answering that question. Their conclusion was that long-range planning was failing because it lacked accountability, lacked connection to execution, and lacked a structured way to honestly evaluate the gap between what a company was good at and what the world around it required. The tool that emerged from that decade of research, originally called SWOT analysis, later refined into SWOT, became the most widely used strategic planning framework in the world. It is used by startups and multinationals, by governments and NGOs, by management consultants and individual professionals planning their own careers. Its longevity is not an accident. SWOT endures because the 4 questions it asks are genuinely fundamental. And because the most common reason strategies fail is not that leaders did not think about the future, it is that they did not think honestly enough about the present. Welcome to The Catalyst. This is episode 17. Today we cover SWOT analysis, its origins, its 4 quadrants in depth, how to run a SWOT that actually produces strategic insight, and why most SWOT analyses fail not because the framework is wrong, but because the conversations that fill the quadrants are not honest enough. SWOT divides strategic reality into 4 quadrants across 2 dimensions. Strengths and weaknesses are internal. They describe what the organization is and what it can do today. Opportunities and threats are external. They describe what the environment around the organization is offering and imposing. Strengths are the internal capabilities, resources, and advantages that give the organization a competitive edge. They answer the question: what do we genuinely do well? Not what we aspire to do well. Not what we think we do well. What do we actually do well, as evidenced by outcomes? Apple's strengths in a SWOT analysis would include its brand, one of the most valuable in the world, its ecosystem integration that creates deep customer lock-in, its hardware design capability, and its financial position that allows massive investment in new categories. These are not aspirational claims. They are evidenced by decades of sustained premium pricing, customer loyalty, and margins that no competitor in consumer electronics has been able to match. Weaknesses are the internal limitations, gaps, and vulnerabilities that constrain performance. They answer the question: what do we do poorly, or not at all, that a more honest assessment would force us to acknowledge? This is the quadrant where SWOT analyses most commonly fail. Weaknesses get softened into areas for development. Real weaknesses, the ones that actually threaten the strategy, get left out because naming them feels uncomfortable. Nokia's failure to recognize its software development capability as a genuine weakness, not a temporary gap, but a structural limitation, is one of the most studied strategic blind spots of the 21st century. The company's hardware excellence was a genuine strength. Its software capability was a genuine weakness. A SWOT that did not clearly state the latter could not generate a strategic response to the threat that Apple's iOS represented when it arrived in 2007. Opportunities are external conditions, market trends, technological shifts, regulatory changes, competitive gaps, demographic movements, that the organization could exploit. They are not wishful thinking. They are identifiable, evidenced dynamics in the environment that favor action. The growth of digital payments infrastructure across South and Southeast Asia in the 2010s represented a genuine opportunity for financial institutions, fintechs, and technology companies who identified it early enough to position before the market matured. Paytm, PhonePe, and Google Pay all moved into spaces that traditional banking infrastructure had left open. The opportunity was visible to anyone looking honestly at the environment. Threats are external forces that could harm the organization's performance or viability: new competitors, substitutes, regulatory headwinds, shifting customer preferences, economic conditions. Like weaknesses, threats tend to be understated in SWOT analyses because naming them requires confronting uncomfortable possibilities. Blockbuster's failure to identify streaming as a credible threat, even as Netflix was growing its subscriber base through the mid-2000s, is the canonical example of a threat ignored until it was fatal. The signals were available. The SWOT analysis, had it been run with honesty rather than optimism, would have surfaced them. The most common SWOT failure is treating the exercise as complete once the 4 quadrants are filled. A completed SWOT matrix is not a strategy. It is inputs to a strategy. The value of SWOT lies in what happens when you use the 4 quadrants to generate strategic options. The TOES matrix, an extension of SWOT developed by Heinz Weyrich in 1982, makes this explicit by combining the quadrants to produce 4 categories of strategic choice. So strategies, strengths, opportunities. Ask how you can use your strengths to capitalize on the identified opportunities. These are your growth plays. Amazon Web Services was an SO strategy. Amazon's strengths in cloud infrastructure, built to run its own e-commerce operations, were deployed to capture an enormous commercial opportunity in cloud computing before the major technology players had built comparable products. WO strategies, weaknesses, opportunities. Ask how you can address your weaknesses to capture opportunities you would otherwise miss. A company that identifies a strong opportunity in the Asian market but has a weakness in local language and cultural capability must invest in that capability to pursue the opportunity. The opportunity is real. The weakness is the barrier to reaching it. SAINT strategies, strengths, threats. Ask how you can use your strengths to defend against or neutralize identified threats. Coca-Cola's response to health trend threats has been to use its distribution strength, its brand capital, and its portfolio breadth to acquire water and health drink brands, using existing strengths to hedge against a threat to its core product. WT strategies, weaknesses, threats, are the defensive plays. Where a weakness coincides with a threat, the organization is most exposed. These intersections often point to the scenarios that require the most urgent attention, or the most honest conversation about whether a market is still the right one to compete in. A SWOT that works is a SWOT built on evidence, not on consensus. There are 3 specific practices that separate useful SWOT analyses from comfortable ones. The first is demanding evidence for every entry. Every strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat should be supported by data, customer feedback, competitive intelligence, or observable market trends. A strength without evidence is a belief. A threat without evidence is a worry. Neither is strategic input. The second is separating the internal conversation from the external conversation. Mixing strengths with opportunities or weaknesses with threats is one of the most common SWOT errors. Internal and external analyses require different information sources, different conversations, and different levels of humility. The internal conversation requires honest self-assessment. The external conversation requires genuine customer and market insight, not assumptions. The third is ensuring the SWOT is done from the customer's perspective, not just the organization's. A strength is only strategically meaningful if customers value it. A weakness is only strategically material if customers experience it. Organizations that run SWOTs without customer data consistently overrate their strengths and under-identify their weaknesses, precisely because they are looking inward rather than through their customers' eyes. 5 things to carry from this episode. 1. SWOT is not a strategy. It is a structured way to gather the inputs a strategy needs. The exercise is not complete when the 4 quadrants are filled. It is complete when the quadrants have been used to generate and evaluate strategic options. 2. The weaknesses and threats quadrants are where most SWOT analyses fail. Comfortable SWOTs understate both. The value of the framework is in its capacity to force an honest conversation about what you are not good at and what the environment is doing to you, not just what you hope for. 3. Combine SWOT with TOES to move from diagnosis to direction. So, WO, ST, and WT strategies are not just academic categories. They are real strategic choices about where to invest, what to fix, how to defend, and when to exit. 4. SWOT is most powerful when the conversation behind it is structured, evidence-based, and cross-functional. A SWOT built by the leadership team without customer input, without competitive intelligence, and without operational perspective will systematically miss the most important truths. 5. Your action. Run a personal SWOT on your own professional situation. What do you genuinely do well? What do you genuinely do poorly? What opportunities exist in your industry or organization right now? What trends or forces threaten your relevance? The framework works for individuals just as powerfully as it works for organizations. Coming up on episode 18 of The Catalyst, we move from strategy into influence. The IDA model. Attention, interest, desire, action. The oldest and most durable framework in marketing and communication. One that explains how every great advertisement, every effective sales conversation, and every compelling pitch moves people from awareness to commitment. Over 125 years old, and more relevant than ever. Stay tuned.